Picture this: the bustling streets of ancient Athens filled with scholars, merchants, and citizens going about their day. Among them walks a strange figure, an unkempt man with a lit lantern scanning the faces of passers-by, despite the bright Mediterranean sun shining overhead. When questioned about his peculiar behavior, he simply replies, "I am looking for an honest man." This wasn't a madman, but Diogenes of Sinope, perhaps the most provocative philosopher who ever lived. A man who rejected wealth, defied kings, lived in a barrel, and chose to make the streets his stage for demonstrating profound philosophical truths. Today on Eternal Philosophies, we dive into the extraordinary life of the man known as the dog, whose radical approach to philosophy continues to challenge our assumptions about civilization, happiness, and what it truly means to live a good life. Who was Diogenes? Diogenes of Sinope was born around 400 BCE in the Greek colony of Sinope on the Black Sea coast, modern-day Turkey. The son of a banker named Hypatius, his early life took a dramatic turn when he became involved in a scandal involving the defacement of currency, an act that would symbolically foreshadow his life's work of defacing the currency of social conventions. Exiled from his homeland, Diogenes made his way to Athens, where he embraced extreme poverty and simplicity, eventually becoming the most famous exponent of the philosophical school known as Cynicism. What made Diogenes extraordinary was his commitment to living his philosophy rather than merely theorizing about it. Nicknamed the dog, kynikos in Greek, from which we get the word cynic, he embraced this moniker with pride, seeing in dogs the qualities he most admired: living in the present, satisfying natural needs without shame, and displaying loyalty to those who deserved it while barking at pretenders. Unlike other philosophers who wrote elaborate treatises, Diogenes taught through his actions and biting wit. He became known throughout the ancient world for his theatrical provocations and absolute rejection of social norms, using his own body and behavior as instruments to demonstrate what he saw as the absurdity of conventional life. The philosophy of Diogenes and his teachings. At its core, Diogenes' philosophy centered on the radical pursuit of virtue through a return to nature. He believed that human happiness required nothing more than meeting one's natural needs, while freeing oneself from artificial desires created by civilization. This perspective led him to develop a philosophy characterized by self-sufficiency, autarkia. Diogenes believed humans needed very little to be truly happy. By training himself to endure extreme conditions, from scorching heat to freezing cold, he demonstrated that comfort was merely a social convention, not a necessity. He has the most who is most content with the least, he would say. Rejection of social norms. For Diogenes, most social customs and conventions were arbitrary constraints that prevented humans from living naturally. He challenged these norms through deliberately shocking behavior, showing that many taboos were merely social constructs rather than moral imperatives. Cosmopolitanism. When asked where he came from, Diogenes famously replied, "I am a citizen of the world, cosmopolites." This revolutionary concept rejected the Greek emphasis on city-state identity, suggesting instead a universal human community based on reason rather than local customs or laws. Living example. Over-theory. Unlike Plato and Aristotle, who wrote extensive theoretical works, Diogenes believed philosophy should be practiced rather than merely discussed. The foundation of every state is the education of its youth, he asserted, but this education should come through example rather than abstraction. Asceticism as freedom. By renouncing possessions and conventional comforts, Diogenes claimed to achieve greater freedom than even kings possessed. His extreme minimalism, owning only a cloak, a walking stick, and initially a cup, which he later discarded, was his path to liberation from dependency on external things. Truth-speaking, parrhesia. Diogenes practiced radical honesty, speaking truth regardless of social consequences. Of what use is a philosopher who doesn't hurt anybody's feeling, one he asked, suggesting that uncomfortable truths were more valuable than comforting falsehoods. Virtue through action. For Diogenes, virtue wasn't an abstract concept, but a practical way of living. He believed that right living came from following reason and speaking truth, not from adhering to social expectations or accumulating knowledge for its own sake. Extraordinary life and provocations. Diogenes' life was filled with provocative incidents that demonstrated his philosophy in action. Perhaps his most famous encounter was with Alexander the Great. When the young conqueror, having heard of the philosopher's reputation, sought him out in Corinth, he found Diogenes lounging in the sun beside his barrel. Standing over the philosopher, Alexander declared, "I am Alexander the Great," to which Diogenes barely looked up. When Alexander graciously offered to grant him any wish, Diogenes simply replied, "Stand out of my sunlight." Far from being offended, Alexander reportedly told his entourage, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." The philosopher's decision to live in a large barrel, or wine cask, in the Athenian marketplace, rather than in a conventional home, became one of his most recognizable characteristics. This choice symbolized his rejection of material comfort and his commitment to extreme simplicity. One day, observing a child drinking water from cupped hands, Diogenes immediately threw away his wooden cup, his last utensil, declaring that he had been outdone in simplicity by the child. When Plato gained acclaim for defining humans as featherless bipeds, Diogenes famously plucked a chicken, brought it to Plato's academy, and threw it on the floor during a lecture, announcing, "Behold, I've brought you a man." Plato was subsequently forced to modify his definition to include "with broad, flat nails." In his later years, Diogenes was captured by pirates and sold into slavery. When asked what skill he possessed that would make him valuable, he replied, "Governing men," and instructed the auctioneer to ask, "Who needs a master?" He was purchased by a Corinthian named Xeniades, whose children he educated and whose household he managed with remarkable skill. 10 powerful quotes from Diogenes. 1. It is the privilege of the gods to want nothing, and of godlike men to want little. This quote encapsulates Diogenes' core philosophy of self-sufficiency, autarkia. He argues that true freedom and divine-like status come not from satisfying endless desires, but from minimizing those desires in the first place, making one less dependent on external circumstances for happiness. 2. It was a favorite expression of Theophrastus that time was the most valuable thing that a man could spend. While this wisdom is attributed to Theophrastus, Aristotle's successor, it aligns with Diogenes' philosophy about valuing the essentials. The quote highlights the irreplaceable nature of time as our most precious resource, suggesting that how we allocate our limited time reflects our true values more accurately than how we spend our money or words. 3. In a rich man's house, there is no place to spit but his face. This provocative statement delivers a scathing critique of wealth and those who accumulate it. Diogenes suggests that in a perfectly maintained wealthy household, with its pristine surfaces and decorations, the only suitable place for impurity is the face of the owner himself, whose moral character has been corrupted by excessive wealth and materialism. 4. The foundation of every state is the education of its youth. Here, Diogenes recognizes the fundamental importance of proper education for societal well-being. He believed that a state's character and future are determined by how its young people are shaped, emphasizing that philosophical education should focus on developing virtue rather than merely accumulating knowledge. 5. Dogs and philosophers do the greatest good and get the fewest rewards. This quote cleverly plays on Diogenes' nickname, the dog, while making a serious point about recognition and value. He suggests that both dogs, loyal, honest, living by nature, and truth-seeking philosophers, provide invaluable services to humanity, but are often underappreciated compared to those with wealth or political power. 6. I am not an Athenian or a Greek, but a citizen of the world. This declaration explicitly rejects narrow patriotism or nationalism. Diogenes sees artificial divisions between cities and nations as obstacles to recognizing our common humanity, advocating instead for a universal citizenship based on shared reason rather than accident of birth. This revolutionary concept of cosmopolitanism, cosmopolites, would influence philosophical thought for centuries. 7. The sun too shines into cesspools and is not polluted. In this metaphorical statement, Diogenes suggests that truly virtuous individuals can engage with all aspects of life without being corrupted. Just as sunlight remains pure despite touching filth, a philosophically grounded person can navigate society's moral cesspools while maintaining their integrity and clarity of purpose. 8. He has the most who is most content with the least. This paradoxical wisdom inverts conventional notions of wealth and abundance. Rather than defining richness through accumulation, Diogenes locates true wealth in the psychological state of contentment with simplicity, suggesting that freedom from desire is more valuable than the satisfaction of desire. 9. We have 2 ears and 1 tongue, so that we would listen more and talk less. Diogenes uses this clever anatomical observation to deliver practical wisdom about communication. He suggests that nature itself designed humans to listen twice as much as they speak, advocating for thoughtful receptivity over constant self-expression, a lesson particularly relevant for philosophers who seek understanding. 10. After he was exiled, when someone reminded him that the people of Sinope had sentenced him to exile, he said, "And I sentenced them to stay at home." This witty retort demonstrates Diogenes' ability to reframe apparent misfortune as freedom. By inverting the power dynamic with his homeland, he suggests that his exile was actually liberation, while those who remained in Sinope were the truly constrained ones, prisoners of convention, limited geography, and provincial thinking. Impact of Diogenes. Diogenes' influence extended far beyond his lifetime, shaping philosophical thought for millennia. Most directly, his approach formed the foundation of the Cynic school of philosophy, which continued for several centuries after his death. His emphasis on simplicity and self-sufficiency profoundly influenced the development of Stoicism, with Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, adapting many Cynic principles into a more socially acceptable form. The concept of cosmopolitanism that Diogenes pioneered, declaring himself a citizen of the world rather than of any particular city-state, represented a revolutionary break from the intensely localized identities of ancient Greece. This idea would eventually inform modern conceptions of universal human rights and global citizenship. Diogenes' method of challenging social norms through provocative public demonstrations provided a template for philosophical and social criticism that continues to inspire activists and social critics today. His emphasis on living one's philosophy, rather than merely theorizing about it, influenced numerous ascetic traditions across various cultures and time periods. Even his confrontation with Alexander the Great has become a timeless symbol of the philosopher's moral authority over worldly power. This meeting between the man who owned nothing and the man who conquered the known world continues to represent the triumph of spiritual freedom over material dominance. Throughout history, Diogenes has served as inspiration for those questioning the excesses and absurdities of their societies. From Renaissance humanists to modern minimalists, his radical approach to simplicity continues to challenge our assumptions about wealth, status, and happiness. His philosophy speaks powerfully to contemporary concerns about consumerism, environmental sustainability, and the search for authentic living in an increasingly artificial world. In a world increasingly dominated by materialism, status-seeking, and environmental crisis, Diogenes' message about simplicity and living according to nature resonates with renewed urgency. His life reminds us that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from those willing to stand outside society's conventions. If you've enjoyed exploring the provocative wisdom of Diogenes with us today, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Eternal Philosophies for more journeys into history's most fascinating thinkers.